Good afternoon, everyone. I will have to apologise in advance. I think I've got a bit of a long COVID, so I might have to start and cough a little bit every now and then. But thanks for coming out to see my talk on the Roswell and San Antonio gold deposits. My talk is going to be more of a current description of these deposits and some nearby prospects. Dave Meats in his previous Mines and Wines presentation sort of covered the discovery story, and he's also covered the Wyoming and Coloma deposits in the current TGO operations previously as well. Just the usual disclaimer, because I do speculate a little bit in the second half of the talk. And just an overview. So I'll start with a brief background of the Timingly Gold Project, which includes the Timingly Gold operations and the Timingly Gold Extension Project. The TGEP is the addition of Roswell and San Antonio to the mine plan and all of the work and sort of approvals around that. I'll go over the regional geology and then talk a bit more about the local geology of Roswell and San Antonio, and then briefly go over 3 satellite prospects sort of in the vicinity of those 2 deposits, and then cover some implications and what's happening next in the Timingly area. So the TGP tenement package covers quite a large area. Good for left-handers. It runs about 70 k's from just north of Timingly down through Peak Hill, past Alkane and nearly to Parks. The last 15 plus years has been focused mainly on the northern portion of the project, which is that red sort of circle there, with the initial discovery of the Wyoming and Coloma deposits. TGO has been in operation since about 2014, mining those initial deposits, first as open cut and now mainly underground. The addition of the TGEP is anticipated to enable TGO to operate until at least the early 2030s at this point. The total resources at Roswell and San Antonio currently stands at about 1.3 million ounces. When combined with the initial resource at TGO, that creates a current total endowment of the area of around 2.2 million. The image over here on the left shows some of the early planned pit designs, as well as some of the sort of initial underground development that's planned at Roswell. That is changing as we sort of continue to sort of understand more about, and I think even the decline is now on the eastern side, because it was where some new lodes are now. Since the new highway sits right over the top of Roswell and San Antonio, right along sort of here, the current plan is to start mining Roswell first from underground while the highway is being moved, and then we'll access that via a 3-kilometre long drive here. And then once we've created that new sort of highway realignment, then we'll then start the pits. So I think they're about halfway complete now with that underground drive, and they should be getting to Roswell in about 6 to 12 months. I get different stories every time. So geological setting. The Timingly Gold Project is focused along the Mingelow Volcanics, shown in that little green slice over there. It's a slice of volcanics, intrusives and volcaniclastics separated from the rest of the Junior Narromine volcanic belt over here by the Parks Thrust along there. The Mingelow Volcanics hosts orogenic and epithermal mineralisation, and is surrounded by the barren marine sediments of the Cotton Formation, which you can sort of see in the yellow and in the sort of orangey brown there. The Mingelow Volcanics and the Cotton Formation have been described by fairly recent literature as occurring in a zone of high strain called the Kyandra Narromine structure, which is bounded by the Parks Thrust to the west and by the Mudgeon Cobble Fault and Harvey Thrust to the east over here. This strain is manifesting in the area as a sort of roughly north-south striking penetrative foliation throughout the Mingelow, and also as localised zones of shearing and folding. Most of the Mingelow Volcanics is undercover, usually 5 to 60 metres, though in places up to 100. Where there is outcrop, there are usually some historic workings, such as at the Miles United mine, but aside from those sites, the main exploration techniques have been geophysics and drilling. As a result of that, since the initial discoveries were situated along the sort of western edge of the Mingelow Volcanics, most subsequent drilling and exploration has been focused along that margin, and so that's where most of the recent discoveries have been. And that leads me to sort of feel that the rest of the Mingelow belt is pretty under-drilled. Focusing in on Roswell and San Antonio, the two deposits are strongly associated with long, narrow, north-northeast striking vertical lavas and sills. You can sort of see that in the lilac and the pink over there in this plan, surrounded by volcanoclastic sediments, which we're showing in green here. The contact with the cotton formation in yellow is an angular unconformity that is subparallel to the Mingeler volcanics stratigraphy. There are several thin late tholeiitic dolerite dikes. You probably can't actually see them, they're so thin and the colour contrast isn't good. They are much less significant than the dikes that we see at Coloma 1 to the north in TGO. These brown blobs also, they're interpreted to be large dioritic intrusions associated with the Copper Hill Suite. We haven't done much work on them, but at this point they don't seem to be mineralised, so we probably won't do much more work anyway. And you can also see this grey line here, that's the Newell Highway, running right over the top of San Antonio and Roswell, and the planned pit sort of straddles exactly over the highway there. So it's easy to get to, but it means that we have to do a bit of work to open it up. Again, lithology has a really strong control of mineralisation, it seems. The vast majority is contained within these andesite lavas, shown here in lilac and magenta, followed by these plagioclase hornblende bearing munzadiorite units in the sort of brown-orange there and hidden over there, that we think are sills, and also in these very thin units of a more dacitic composition, sort of over there in southern San Antonio and hidden behind the andesite in Roswell at depth. Minor mineralisation also sits inside this blue large plagioclase aurgite munzadiorite intrusion. We're currently thinking that the favourable rheology created by these long, thin, brittle units sitting in a more ductile package of sediments is the main reason for them hosting the gold. That is that they fracture nicely when hit by the hydrothermal system that brought in the goods. But we are also wondering whether the chemistry of the rock plays a role in whether those igneous units were more reactive than other surrounding rocks. These are a couple of sections showing how the lodes are positioned within the significant igneous units at Roswell and San Antonio. You can see that the intercepts shown in the red sort of hatching are generally contained within the andesite, which is the lilac and magenta here, and also in the dacite, which you can possibly faintly see sort of dry straping the andesite here at depth in Roswell. The lodes do also appear to blow out above the andesite in Roswell, though in the sediments they tend to be lower grade and can be pretty discontinuous. There's a similar trend in this new western munzadiorite sill over here, the one with the hornblende in it. They appear to occur within and along the margins of the munzadiorite unit. In San Antonio, the andesite is actually truncated by the paleosurface, and within the andesite, the lodes dip more moderately to the east until they hit the edge of the andesite, and then they sort of steepen and start to pinch out as they follow it down. The andesite is the major host for mineralisation out here. We've identified two geochemical types that enable a number of separate lavas to be mapped. Nickel content is currently the simplest way to discriminate them, though there are lots of other elements which we can use to sort of pick them apart. The two types are visually and petrographically identical, but mapping of the separate flows is aided by occasional sort of sediment wedges and autobreccia textures on the margins of the individual lava units. And those contacts always seem to coincide with the sort of changing of the geochemistry of the lavas. Through this, we found that San Antonio is dominated by a single low nickel lava up to about 80 metres thick over here, and it thins to the south, and that Roswell is hosted by several thinner lavas of alternating composition. The multiple lavas at Roswell are thought to have contributed to that more substantial mineralisation that we're finding in that deposit, simply due to the greater rheology with lots of thinner units with sort of bits of sediment in between them. Another significant host are these very narrow units that we're currently calling dacite sills. They only occur immediately west of the andesite lavas in southern San Antonio, and we're also starting to see them at depth as a thin unit in Roswell. They're geochemically distinct from all the other igneous units in that they're just a lot more felsic. And they're also usually intensely altered to sericite, silica and carbonate to the point of near destruction of rock texture. You can still see in places a bit of the preservation of what might be the original colour, but most of it is almost, in this sample at least, is almost entirely silica. You can sometimes see little feldspar shapes, probably can't see it from here, but there's one around there, I think. They can be associated with very high gold grades in Roswell and in San Antonio, and since they seem to alter so easily, it raises the question whether they're just more reactive than even the andesite to the hydrothermal fluids, and whether that is part of the reason why they can hold such good grades. We've got 2 units that we're calling monzodiorites in the area. One is an aurgite-bearing intrusion, medium to coarse-grained and holocrystalline, that sits east of the andesite in Roswell. It seems to be largely altered to white mica chlorite and carbonate, and in places it gets like really intensely sheared to the point where most of the time it was being logged as a sediment. It holds minor low-grade mineralization, which may be due to the fact that it's a pretty soft sheared rock and it just didn't have the rheology to develop any sort of decent lodes through brittle fracture. The other is a hornblende-bearing sill, which has much more in common with the andesite in terms of geometry, in that it's a unit only up to about 50 metres thick, sort of dips vertically, runs north-south, all that stuff, and is porphyritic with a fine-grained to glassy ground mass. This hornblende monzodiorite can hold significant mineralization, and lode continuity has been demonstrated within this unit in the deepest drilling so far at Roswell and in San Antonio. So I think there's a lot of upside with this unit here. Surrounding the Mingelow volcanics is the Cotton Formation, late Ordovician to early Silurian sequence of turbiditic siltstones and conglomerates. We've got an example of the conglomerates here. The big distinguisher with the Cotton Formation is the abundant detrital quartz in the cotton, and we've got some large sort of detrital quartz fragments in this conglomerate here, which is largely absent from the Mingelow. No gold is known to occur in the cotton so far, and I think, I'm not fully sure, but at the Coloma deposits, the contact even appears to truncate some of the lodes at that deposit. See that Ian's nodding, so it's good. There are also several tholeiitic dolerite dikes, cross-cuttings, the stratigraphy and mineralisation at Roswell and San Antonio. Unlike at Coloma to the north, they're really thin here, and they've got no impact, I can tell, on the shapes of the lodes, and really aren't associated with any significant offsets either. So they're a pretty good news story. So just going over structure now. The general north-south orientation of stratigraphy around Roswell and San Antonio is similar to that along the belt as a whole. Bedding and the lavas all generally dip vertically, as does the unconformable contact of the Cotton Formation to the west over here. The penetrative foliation that is evident in the volcanoclastic sediments, the sheared aurgite monzodiorite, and in the Cotton Formation is all subparallel to the bedding and the stratigraphy, so it's often hard to just tell it apart even. We've mapped out 3 northwest to west-northwest faults in the vicinity of Roswell and San Antonio. And I think there are probably more, but they're just too small to sort of pick out. They've only caused minor offsets and sometimes some minor rotation to the stratigraphy and the lodes. It's not really clear how important these faults are to the distribution of mineralisation. We certainly see them where there's mineralisation, but is that just because we're drilling lots there? So, not really sure. The Rosewood Fault was inferred from the Aramag, which I've marked here in this sort of line with the question marks here, and was used to sort of explain the apparent offset between Roswell and San Antonio, which you can sort of see in the plan there and over here. And while some faulting is evident in core, we've put a hole like sort of right up through here, and we just hit more andesite. And also deeper drilling in southern Roswell also found more andesite that's consistent with this big low nickel unit. So we're thinking that it's just one unit that sort of tapers off and pinches out near Roswell. There might be a bit of a fold going on in here, but we've not really sort of looked at the bedding orientations much yet. So just going over the mineralisation characteristics. So the lodes at Roswell and San Antonio, basically the same strike as the stratigraphy, but prefer to dip moderately to steeply to the east, particularly in the andesite and that aurgite monzodiorite intrusion. However, where the host igneous unit is thinner, when the lodes hit the edge of the host rock, the lodes just tend to run vertically and just strike north-south. Minor lodes typically occur as sheeted veins and then develop into stockworks and breccias like this one with the visible gold as the lode thickens. The assemblage is typical for orogenic gold, with the best grades usually where there is significant arsenopyrite. So a few more images showing some more mineralisation textures here. We've got some more dacite, intensely silicified and mineralised, and then contact with surrounding sediments. And you can sort of see that this intense silica alteration has not propagated into the sediments. Why? There's also I think there's also stuff or gold that sort of also forms in here. These little fractures here, they're just like quartz carbonate veins. We've got a multi-stage vein in andesite in Roswell. You can sort of see these sort of glassy grey sort of fragments of an earlier quartz phase, which has been then brecciated and infilled by the small milky quartz phase. And these ones tend to have very high grades and often where we get the most arsenopyrite. We can get mineralisation in sediments. This is from a sediment wedge in between two andesite lavas. And you can sort of see that we've got vein development occurring sort of on fold hinges, sort of as the sediment has been deformed. And this is sort of like more of a stockwork in that hornblende monzodiorite. Seems to be a bit multi-generational. And you've got sulfides in the veins and also disseminated around it. The alteration assemblage of the wall rock around the mineralised veins matches that of the veins. It's not really surprising there. And as we move away from mineralisation, we transition to a chlorite-dominant alteration that then goes into the regional sort of metamorphic epidote chloride alteration. In some places, we are seeing a bit of a hematite wash between the sericite and chlorite zones, but that isn't really consistent between deposits and prospects, so we're still sort of thinking about that. The thickness of the alteration zonation varies from centimetres, like here, to tens of metres. Normally, the thickest alteration is around the biggest lodes. We can also get very broad sericitic alteration envelopes in the volcaniclastics with no real associated grade. So just talking about the three satellite prospects. El Paso, the first one, was discovered before Roswell and San Antonio in 2019. So San Antonio is just the north there. And we've been drilling on and off there ever since. It's got the same prospective andesite in the lilac here and down over here, and a little bit of dacite as well that we've found. But so far the mineralisation does not appear to be as well developed as the deposits to the north. Lodes defined so far can be high grade. You can sort of see some of the numbers there. But they seem to take the form of narrow chutes with poor continuity along strike. We do need to do more work. I think we've hardly touched this andesite unit here. And we also, where's the andesite in this little sort of fault block over here? So I think, we will keep playing with El Paso. McLean's, that sits right near Roswell and was last really looked at in about 2004. That initial exploration was based on soil sampling because the cover is very, very shallow around here, and was followed by RAB and then shallow RC that intersected sort of discontinuous minor grades in volcaniclastics. That wasn't very exciting, and so people moved on to developing the Wyoming 1 and Coloma deposits. But since they're going to put a haul road near there, we decided to just have a look and put a few more holes underneath some of the low grades that we were seeing. And this one, MCP92, hit a new andesite that we didn't know about. It's got much more significant mineralisation. I think that's 30-something metres at 1.8 with some higher grade subdomains in there. And these minor intercepts, they just appear to be sort of leakage lodes propagating up out of the andesite. Step-out drilling has already confirmed continuity of the andesite and mineralisation over about 300 metres, and we think that there's potential for another 600 to 700 metres. The andesite at McLean's is magnetic and coincides with a ridge that we can see in some recently completed drone mag. The potential extension of that ridge to the south is obscured by this big paleochannel feature here, but as we've been drilling deeper at Roswell, the collars have been stepping out to the east, and we've started to see another andesite coming up, which lines up perfectly with McLean's and has got the same composition and everything. So I think there's some more potential there that's very close to Roswell and very close to the upcoming underground, which I think is going to run somewhere like there. So perfectly positioned. The Plains prospect was discovered by sterilisation drilling all around Roswell and San Antonio. And at this point, we've put a bunch of air core, a bunch of RC and one diamond hole into this prospect. The mineralisation so far occurs as sheeted veins surrounded by disseminated sulfides and has been traced along about 400 metres of strike and air core. The rock appears to be a subvolcanic basaltic andesite that is visually very similar to the rocks at Coloma, which is one of the current mines to the north. Just got some examples of that basaltic andesite. So least salted basaltic andesite, you can see coarsely porphyritic, very similar to Coloma. And then here an example of sort of sheeted or tension veins with sulfides disseminated around it. And then what we think might be pepperite, where we've got black shale sort of filling in all these like sort of brecciated fragmented pieces of the basaltic andesite, which is another very sort of common texture that we see at Coloma to the north. So just going over to implications. The main implication for me that it isn't just the western margin of the Mindelo volcanics that is prospective. The discovery of plains over here sort of opens up, we think, this whole sort of other part of the belt along here. And so that's quite exciting. We also need to keep an eye out for more deeply buried deposits. So for example, the leakage from the andesite at McLean's, that's pretty sort of ordinary looking stuff in the shallow drilling, but go underneath it and it turns into something a lot better. And that andesite, that's about 150 metres from surface. You could also say the same about Roswell, where the andesite tops out about 50 to 70 metres from surface. So the next steps for the Timingly Gold project are more drilling and more geophysics at this point. We're also looking to support an honours project to assess the geochemical prospectivity of the rocks in the Mindelo volcanics to host gold. This planned project is based on some recent work by Chris Foisey at Monash. In this work, he demonstrated the potentially significant role that host rock chemistry or earlier alteration can play in the formation of orogenic gold deposits. He demonstrated or predicted rock reactivity through thermodynamic modelling of the interaction of a given whole rock chemical and mineral assemblage and a given hydrothermal assemblage, determined from looking at existing deposits in his study area in Victoria, and I think it was Fosterville and something else. I really want to apply that methodology to here in the Mindelo in Timingly, because we've got a few prospects where we've got the right looking rocks, the right looking alteration, veining and sulfides, but no gold. And it'd be really good to sort of, we can just like hit a bunch of rocks, even other rocks that might not be mineralised now. They've got the right chemistry, they could be mineralised elsewhere, so we don't need to walk away from them. We haven't found a student yet, and I've been asking some of the other students around here, and most of them have already got projects. But if any of you know anyone, or if I'm still working on them to see if they can drop their current project and do mine, let me know. Thanks for listening. And I'd like to thank Tony Crawford for a lot of the petrography and getting us started on the lithogeochemistry, and all of the past and current Alkane staff who have been involved in this project.